Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second community meeting for our land use plan and capital plan project. I would like, do we have Michelle on? I'm just waiting a moment to see if Michelle comes on. To begin the evening off, I would like to take a moment in time to honor and recognize the real and the really sad discoveries that the nation as a whole recently experienced from the discoveries in Kamloops, BC. If we could just take just one moment to kind of reflect on that. Miigwech. So the team for the land use plan and capital plan has been hard at it for a few months now. We meet on a monthly basis to go over the progress of the project and keep in touch with the project consultants. Although COVID-19 made face-to-face meetings very difficult, we received a good amount of input from the community. We conducted online activities such as surveys, community mapping, and interviews, and also gave the community the option to provide input via paper surveys. We thank everybody for the input on this. It truly is a venture whereby the end product, the land use plan, can guide us in making decisions that are a priority, as well as making sure it's done in the most sustainable way possible for the community now and in the future. We're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel now in regards to our land use plan portion of the project. We've compiled a community narrative summary, which you may have seen in your mailbox as well as online. This very briefly outlines all the information that we've collected to date. And tonight we're going to attempt to provide more details on that narrative. And I will pass this over to Mitchell.
I'll pass it over quickly to, or is it going to me or Corey first? Or this looks unorganized. I think it's going to
Corey. Yep, sorry about that.
Yeah. No worries.
Thanks, Larissa. It's my honor to be here to represent Negan Burnside and SVS as part of the consultant team. Not sure if who else is on the video watching at this point in time, but I myself am a member of Chippewas and Nawash and also the president of Negan Burnside. So just honored to be able to work with the community on this and have my team and the SVS team provide what is a rather important document, I think, in just helping to plan where the community wants to go in the future. So for me today, this will be basically all that you're going to hear from me, unless there's questions that my local knowledge can help. But I'm going to introduce the team that's really doing the hard work first from my group. Our project manager is Matthew Pasner. And joining us from Shared Value Solutions, the team that's working on the land use plan portion of the project. Negan Burnside is focused more on the capital infrastructure plan. We have Mitchell Avis, who's the project manager, and Rachel White from Shared Value Solutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to the people that really make the magic happen. And at this point in time, pass it over to Mitchell.
Thank you, Corey. And I'll just quickly run through the agenda for tonight. I'll just go through this quickly just to give a little update around what to expect, and then I'll pass it over to my colleague Rachel, who will take over for the next little bit. So really tonight we've got planned, hoping to work or meet with you and discuss these important issues for about the next 55 minutes or so. We're hoping to get through within that time. Rachel's going to do a summary around what we've heard to sort of really reflect back what we've heard through all the community engagement thus far in the process. I'm going to be going through sort of the bulk of the presentation around the issues and option report that we did provide. This will be really a snapshot of it, and I'll get into more detail in a little bit. And then also Negan Burnside and Matt are going to provide an update on the capital infrastructure plan. We've got the time allocated at the end there from about 8 to 8:15 that we're hoping if there's any questions or clarifications we can get through, that we'll address those at the very end. So I'm going to pass it over to Rachel now to talk about what we've heard.
Awesome. Thank you, Mitch. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, some of this will echo what Mitch just went through, will be to reflect back what we've heard through the engagement activities that have gone on through the process of creating the land use plan and the capital infrastructure plan. We'll also gather input from the participants and direction on options for the land use plan. We'll talk about next steps, and then like Mitchell mentioned, there will be time at the end to answer questions. So for this meeting, there will be a couple ways that participants at this meeting can engage, including the chat. So the chat is open at the bottom of your screens. There's an opportunity there to provide feedback. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think about what we're saying. There will also be polls throughout the presentation. So Mitch will run through what that looks like when that comes up. And if you're on this call and you don't feel ready to participate, or perhaps you're joining us on YouTube and you can't participate using this chat function, then please follow up with Larissa Johnston following this meeting. So just to give you a sense of where we're at in the process, we've been gathering information and using that information to inform priorities. And then we're just approaching the plan preparation. So gathering input from this meeting and other meetings with committee members, and then using that information to start drafting the plan. So Mitch, if you could move to the next slide. Great. So just to review a couple of the things that have gone on so far related to community engagement. The first thing that kicked off this project was an introductory video. And then following that release of that video, we hosted a community forum, which was attended by 67 participants. The forum was recorded and it's available on the Chippewas of Nawash YouTube channel. There was an opportunity to ask questions at that forum, and unfortunately, due to time, we weren't able to answer all of the questions. So the unanswered questions, the answers to the unanswered questions were posted in a document on the Nawash website. We also hosted 7 knowledge holder interviews, 4 mapping workshops, and received 40 surveys back. So we took all of this, the information that we gathered, and we created a community narrative. And what that community narrative is a collection of views and opinions of community members written in your words. So the narrative was summarized in a 2-page document, and that document is also available on the Chippewas of Nawash website. So from all of these views and opinions, we identified issues that are important to members, areas at Neashinigming that must be protected, and then opportunities for growth. So in these next slides, I'm going to talk about the themes that came up very regularly in the community engagement narrative. So these were the opinions of the members who participated in the engagement opportunities. So first off, it was very clear that members think that all of Nea-Shinigming should be protected. So there were several parts of the land that were mentioned, including the alvars, the bluffs, shorelines and beaches, the creeks and the sources of the creeks, trails, medicines, species at risk, animals and their habitat, as well as sacred places. Housing was a major concern for many members, specifically not enough houses on reserve, no long-term plan for housing, no housing policies, not a clear process for acquiring a certificate of possession or a CP. And it was clear that many members want to return home or have a place to visit. So the members who participated believed that NAWAS should build in existing developed areas first before expanding into more natural areas. So for instance, NAWAS could upgrade or build housing and First Nation owned buildings in these existing developed areas. NAWAS could renovate houses that are currently in disrepair, or update and repurpose vacant First Nation buildings, such as the old school, the old economic development building. For some members who participated, it wasn't clear what lands at Nea-Shinigming are communal lands. So they wanted to be aware that they didn't want to trespass on CP lands. So members who participated wanted to know the locations of the communal land, such as the beaches and the trails and the natural areas. So members who participated talked about creating new developments in walkable community hubs where housing is grouped alongside businesses and services such as the health center. So members acknowledged that the membership has diverse needs for housing. So for instance, housing for families, housing for single people, and for seniors. And those diverse needs can be met with different housing types. So for instance, single detached housing, apartments, townhouses, or even tiny homes. Members want to keep Nea-Shinigming natural, and they do not want residential lots clear cut in order to build houses, but instead to keep some of those natural spaces. Also, many members were concerned about poor community health and well-being. So many members who are struggling with mental health or substance abuse issues need support and to be included in the community and in this process. Some members are concerned about the contamination and waste, and specifically that the landfill may be affecting the environment and especially water quality. Some members have cluttered yards, and the members who participated believe NAWAS should help them dispose of unwanted goods in a safe and careful way. Also, NAWAS could process recycling as well as garbage because the current services have more limited options for those things. So by doing so, they would, NAWAS would be able to divert more waste. We heard multiple times about NAWAS possibly starting a green energy project, such as solar or wind. The members who participated thought that there were few jobs or business opportunities currently at Nea-Shinigming, although they had many ideas about those opportunities in the future. So for instance, ecotourism was mentioned many times, especially opportunities for members to use traditional skills such as guiding or medicine walks or demonstrations and workshops or selling crafts. There were many business ideas that were shared throughout each engagement opportunity. And some of the ideas that would benefit both members and visitors were a laundromat, a grocery store, restaurants, a training center, a fish processing plant, or a construction business. So members who participated, but if you could just go back one more slide. Members who participated would like all businesses at Neyahshinigming to be eco-friendly. Members want to be mindful of how growing businesses will impact the land and the community. We heard from members that they do not want the area overrun by tourists, and that members want to carefully balance attracting visitors to the community while preserving the natural beauty of Neyahshinigming. Also, there was an idea around a shared workspace. So members wanted to have access to a shared workspace where they could tan hides or string snowshoes, do woodworking, play music, learn, taking online courses, or setting up and operating a business. And then finally, we did ask within the survey that was distributed for members to share with us some words that represented what they thought of when they thought of Neyahshinigming. So we took all these words and created this word cloud. So the largest words were the ones that were cited most often. So this is another way to sort of capture the input of the members. So that's a summary of what we've heard so far. And I mentioned before that throughout this process, we've identified issues that are important to members, and Mitch will take you through some options for how to address those issues. So over to you, Mitchell.
Great, thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Larissa and Corey, for opening up and doing some of the introduction. So again, my name's Mitchell Avis. Sad that we can't be meeting in person, but hopefully in due time, we might be able to get back to that point. So I work with Shared Value Solutions, and as Rachel said, we're helping to work on the land use plan component. And one of our most recent pieces of that project that we've worked on is what we're calling an issues and options report. So really this report has really been the result of all the community engagement that we have done so far that Rachel summarized. And I know she mentioned at the beginning, but I'll just reiterate it because I think it's really important that there is a 2-page summary of the community engagement narrative that is available on NAWASH's website. So anyone can get that. And if you can't access it through the internet, through the website, you can reach out to Larissa as well. And I'm sure she'd be happy to get you a copy of it. It's and really it's a great summary of what we have heard, your voices, in the way that you told it to us. And so we've really taken that engagement narrative and tried to put this issues and options report together. So we've pulled out a lot of the key issues, and we'll go through some of those tonight. We won't be able to go through all of them, and there may be need for another community forum at some point to finish that off, but we'll see how we can get through this. And like Rachel mentioned as well, we're hoping to try and make it a little interactive. I know last time we had the chat function going, so that is active and available again for people who are using Zoom. And we've also got a polling function that we're going to try out with yourselves and to see if it works with NAWASH. So just on to test it out, we've got the first question. So Michael, I know you're controlling the question aspect, so if you're able to put that up for people, we just want to sort of test it out to see, and so you can try it out. So if you're on the Zoom from NAWASH, the first question there is, do you live on or off reserve? And so you can click on reserve, off reserve, or I am not a member. And so I'll just give people about 30 seconds to fill that out. And if you've got any issues, just post it in the chat and we'll see if we can help solve it on the fly for you. So it looks like we've got some. So it looks like reserve about 22%, off reserve 67, and not a member 11. So it looks like we've got a larger percentage of off reserve members tonight. So just going to close out of that on my screen. Go back to the presentation here. So that's great. It looks like it's working. So we'll have a couple more of those questions throughout this presentation as well. So the things we want to focus on tonight is really around the vision of the land use plan, the population projections and land needs, the community development constraints, and we've got lots of maps there to show you as well, just to give you a sense of the things we've looked at, where to grow and how to grow. And I would say those are the core things we want to get through tonight. And depending on how the time goes, we might be able to also talk about economic development and access to shoreline. And if not, we'll have to figure out another way to make sure that we get your input on that. So for the first one, in terms of the vision statement. So this is the vision statement that NAWASH established in the Community Comprehensive Plan. So that was back in 2014. It may also look familiar to some people who filled out the survey because there was a question in there about it. So the vision is an important starting point because it really is the guiding statement and it's the goals for the nation. So everything in the land use plan will help NAWASH achieve its vision. So it's really important that we take the time and make sure that we help NAWASH establish and support you establishing a vision that represents and reflects where you want the nation to go. So from the survey, we did get some feedback on the vision statement, and the one that is up on the screen was the one that was in the survey. Most people who responded, they agreed with the vision statement, but there were some suggestions that people made about how it could better reflect what they want NAWASH to be. So some of that feedback, just in summary, some people said that NAWASH should be planning for the next 7 generations, that it should be sustaining and protecting the culture is more important than economic development. So in terms of balancing those things, they were saying that sustaining and protecting the culture is more important. The NAWASH should strive to be a sustainable community. The community should be more inclusive of the off-reserve membership. There's a comment that someone made around the sentence about accountability does not hold true. And the statement lacks clarity and clear actions to achieve the vision. And so we took that and we also met with the Land Use and Capital Infrastructure Plan Committee earlier this week and went through the vision with them as well. And came up with some changes that we wanted to put forward in sort of a revised vision statement for people. And so I'll just read it out here. And you'll see there is text underlined, and the underlined text represents the changes from the last version that you would have seen in the survey. So the revised vision statement says, we, the Chippewas of NAWASH, unceded First Nation, value the 7 grandfather teachings and believe that through truth, honesty, humility, love, wisdom, courage, and respect, we will be a better First Nation. Through the protection of our treaty rights and the asserting of our Anishinaabe culture, we will strengthen and support our membership, both on and off reserve. We will come together as a community to support members who are struggling. We will protect our lands and waters as the source of our cultural traditions and the path towards a sustainable community for the next 7 generations. We will educate our children about the importance of Neashingameng, our traditions, and our language. So that's the result of the initial community engagement through the survey and some discussions with the committee. So I think we've got a second poll question to bring up now. And we want to get some feedback from you. So do you agree with this vision statement? And so the options there are yes, no, and some of you, because for many different reasons, you just might need some more time to decide or information to decide on whether you believe that's the correct one. And so that's a totally fine option as well. And you can also use the chat to provide any comments you have as well. So I'll give about 30 seconds to a minute for people to answer that question. Just give people a few more seconds here. All right, Michael, if you want to just wrap up the question there, I think that's probably good. Yeah, so it looks like about 38% of people said yes, 13 said no, and 50% said they need more time to decide. And I think that's totally reasonable and totally expected. And I think that's just one thing we want to sort of emphasize too, and we discuss at the committee level this week, is a lot of this information, I mean, it is dense, it's also new. And this is sort of, this is a great opportunity, I think, to present a lot of the information, and hopefully you'll be able to sort of sit on it, think about it, sleep about it, hopefully not sleep about and think about it too much and keep you up at night, but let it percolate for a little bit. And then I think it'd be great to get your feedback at that point. So I think this is all very helpful and useful. So moving on to the next topic area there is really around the population projections and needs. And so in terms of the issue, or it's more the problem that we're trying to just address, is that is really around future population growth, and also how that reflects to reflecting to how much land you need to sort of designate and assign for future development. So the issue here around population projections is that the population of members on Nishingaming represents about 28% of all members. Of the members who live off reserve, most would like to return to Nishingaming. So almost 3/4 of the population lives off reserve. And from the survey that we have done in the previous housing assessment, there is a large amount of people who do want to return back to the community. So why this matters and what this is for. So it really helps estimate future needs in the community from a housing perspective, capital infrastructure, services, and community facilities like emergency services, schools, recreation facilities, things like parks and stuff like that. And it also helps plan for population growth. So depending on what kind of population NAWASH wants to plan for, this is your chance to be proactive in making sure that you can accommodate that over the short term, medium term, but also thinking in that long-term lens through those 7 generations. So I don't to get too caught up with everyone and the numbers on this slide, but I think it's really important that we sort of show things that we were looking at and the things that we put forward in the report. So I will say that when it comes to population projections, they definitely are more of an art than anything. NAWASH has completed population projections on several different projects up to this point, sort of all with different timeframes based on when the project was being done, and using slightly different methodologies. And I'll just say that that is perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with that, because those population projections help with each project. What I want to show with this slide is really that each projection helps establish a range. So you can sort of have low range, moderate, and high end sort of growth scenarios. So you'll see in method 1 there, it projects in that 3rd column, you'll see it projects about 272 more members live on reserve by 2041. And to accommodate those people, you would need about 62 new houses. And looking at sort of lot sizes and how much you need for sort of roads and water line to fit sort of that in, you need about 36 acres worth of land to accommodate that. And so that's what we would sort of consider being sort of a low end scenario. So you're planning for sort of a lower type of growth over the next 20 years. The second method there is what we would sort of consider the moderate method or moderate option. And so in that option, in the 3rd column, you see there'd be 303 more members living on reserve by 2041. And in order to accommodate that, you would need 104 houses and about 60 acres worth of land. And finally, at sort of the high end level, you've got about 505 more members by 2041 and 166 houses needed and 96 acres. So you can start to see that in that range, you start to see between 36 and 96 acres is generally how much land you would need now to accommodate those residential needs in the future. And so doing this work will really help Nawash plan for the next 20 years, but also to have consideration for future generations and how you can start to make sure that you're planning to accommodate more population or more people in the future returning back to the community. So what I want to sort of focus on is really there are sort of opportunities and drawbacks to each method. And what we want to try and understand from yourselves tonight, and with the next polling question we'll get to in a minute, is we're trying to get you to help us understand and determine how many people Nawash should plan for. So whether it's sort of a low, a moderate, or a high population growth. And in this chart, you'll sort of see from the higher population projection and the lower population projection, some of the implications that it does have on a variety of different factors. So in terms of membership, if you plan for a higher population projection, well, then more members can return. Whereas if you plan for a lower population projection, well, then you may not be able to accommodate as many. So fewer members could return. Similarly with lot size, I know this has come up before with Nawash and doing some projects. If you want to have a higher population return to the community, you're probably going to have some lot sizes to accommodate everyone. Whereas if you plan for a lower population, well, then maybe you can have larger lot sizes to accommodate that. So with housing density, with the higher population, just because you're going to have to fit more people into the community, you might have to have higher density housing. So maybe more duplexes, triplexes, multiplexes, or even something like apartments. And with that, a diverse range of housing options. Whereas with a lower population projection, you may still be able to accommodate people, say with single family homes or lower density type housing. Land needs, with a higher population projection, you're generally going to need more land. With a lower population, less land. In terms of planning for or the reacquisition of certificates of possession lands, and this will be a topic we touch on later, but with a higher population projection, just based on the amount of First Nation land available, you may have to look at reacquiring some CP lands to accommodate that growth, or working with CP holders to use their lands to develop on for those homes. And whereas with a lower population projection, you possibly might be able to do that just solely on First Nation land. Similarly, with planning for development of landlocked parcels, you may have to, with a higher population growth, try and figure out more urgent ways to gain access to those parcels. Whereas similarly, as before, with the lower population projection, you might be able to get away with just on First Nation land in terms of how much development you need. And finally, with servicing, and this relates definitely to the full infrastructure plan that Megan Burnside will be working on and beginning shortly over the next number of months. With higher population projection, there becomes a higher demand for servicing, and some lots may not be serviced by the water system, meaning that private services would be required. Whereas, and that's sort of mainly based on the location of where those lots might have to be, versus with lower population projection, there would be lower demands for servicing, but also more likely that future growth can be located on the water line. So wonder if we could pull up the question number 3 for the poll. And we want to get a sense, and again, this might be very early and you need more time to consider the different options here. But if you've got an opinion or a thought, we'd love to know, how much population growth do you think or do you want Nawash to plan for? So would you want to plan for that lower amount, for a moderate amount, a high amount, or you need more time or information to decide? So we'll leave that open for about 30 seconds. All right, Michael, if you want to, oh, I even put the timer on my phone. If you want to put the, awesome, thank you. So it looks like, so nobody said low amount, 23% said moderate, 62 said high amount, and 15% said I need more time or information to decide. So I think that's really interesting, and again, totally respect, and we'd love to hear people's thoughts once you have that time, or if you're able to ask that for that information from Larissa. I'd love to hear your thoughts at that point. But yeah, thank you for the feedback on that. So I'm going to jump to the next slide. So the next one here is, so we call it community development constraints. And so in this one, we started the issues and options report by focusing on what's important to NAWASH. And so I'll come back to that later on at the end of this section, but it included things like Rachel talked about, like the alvars and the bluffs and the burial sites and cemeteries and sacred sites and gathering places, certain trees and many other important things, important places and spaces that NAWASH members shared. A lot of this came from Indigenous knowledge shared by the community through other projects, but also through the groups and the mapping exercises that we had for this project as well. And in addition to those areas, we also completed an analysis of community development constraints. So there is some overlap between sort of the places and spaces that are important, but also with this analysis as well. And so the issue or the problem that we're trying to address through this section, so there are physical land tenure and infrastructure constraints that limit where new development can be concentrated and affect how the community can grow. So these constraints are not all outright like no-go areas for development, but they do present some significant challenges, including to human health, safety, cost, and availability. And so part of the rationale or the thinking is that by identifying these, and you'll see some maps in the upcoming slides, by helping to identify these, it'll help NAWASH make more informed decisions about where development could happen, where building could happen, and hopefully inform decision-making from that point. So why it matters, this will help promote safety of NAWASH members and property, and it'll help you make more informed decisions about what areas should be avoided, or alternatively, from the other side, where development could occur. So this is sort of some of the constraints that were identified and looked at through the issues and options report. And so we'll go through these in the next few slides. So terrain and slope, the alvars, water courses, wetlands, Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, land tenure, infrastructure, and source water protection. So the first one I'm just going to touch on here is terrain. And you'll see on this map, it really illustrates where the bluffs are. And so this was sort of a desktop exercise done to look at different slopes in the community on the land. And so the darker the area, so right along all the three bluffs, and you also see sort of along the shoreline up near the lighthouse, that represents the sort of steeper or steepest slopes. And those would be slopes that are greater than 20%. The sort of orange color there, those are slopes that are between 5 and 20%. And the sort of yellowish color there is 0 to 5%. So in general, like the flatter the land, the easier it is to use and the less expensive it will be to build on. And on the contrary, the steeper the land, the more difficult it is to use and the more expensive it will be to build on. So this is one constraint that has been identified where you'd be able to look at a map like this and understand places that you may want to avoid all by the bluffs. And those are also places that you want to avoid for other reasons, but this is another reason to look at that. Whereas you might be able to also look at this and see places that you might want to build. And for example, if someone has a piece of land, maps like these could help you decide not only just from walking on the land, but even before or after you walk the land, you can use these maps to help plan where you might want to build or develop as well. The second constraint here is around Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. So community members identified some key areas that are definitely susceptible to heavy winds and waves Those were around like Little North Bay Road, the south shore of McGregor Harbor, and the northwest shore of Lighthouse Road. And these hazards present in the shorelines include not just high water levels, but also because of storm surge during wind events, and also dynamic beach erosion that occur because of the waves. So Negan Burnside helped with a desktop exercise to identify areas that are at risk to flooding and added appropriate buffers. They added a 30-meter buffer to those areas. And these provide a starting point for NAWASH to understand areas that are at risk to flooding based on their elevation, but also those areas that are susceptible to that wave uprush and erosion, which might be more at risk or maybe not the best place to develop and grow. So again, this becomes another tool in NAWASH's toolbox to sort of identify places where development could occur safely or building could occur safely, and areas that you might want to avoid or have additional measures to consider on how to mitigate those issues. On this slide, these are the wetlands and water courses. These are all ones that have been identified. So these are the known wetlands and water courses that have been mapped. And based on what the community has told us so far, like all wetlands and courses have been deemed to be important. So again, this is another tool for you to know where they're located. And there are buffers associated with these. There is a recommended 50-meter buffer along water courses and a recommended 30-meter buffer along wetlands. And of course, these, like I said, these are the known ones. There could be other wetlands that maybe just have not been mapped or not evaluated at this point. And the thing with land use planning, and they're always living documents. So as that information becomes known, they can always be added to the plans and added to your decision-making processes. This one is around land tenure. And so this is a map in orange you'll see of all known certificates of possession. This was based on best available information at the time that we wrote the report. So we would love for NAWASH's input to make sure that it's accurate and that it reflects all the current CPs in the community. And Nashingming has a mix of land tenures in the key, including First Nations land and individual lands allocated through CP. So currently we mapped about 35% of Nashingming are CP lands, meaning the remaining 65% are First Nation lands. But once you start to look a little bit deeper, just in terms of land availability and where planning for new neighborhoods and new areas could occur, you start to realize and see that most CP lands are located along the existing road. So about 68% of CP lands have road frontage, yet some remain landlocked. So that has come up before of the landlocked piece of CP lands. And so about 30% of CP lands are landlocked. And CP lands can be considered a constraint for the First Nation because they are privately held and managed. So the First Nation isn't the one that manages or holds those lands. So for example, a majority, so over 50%, 57% of Nashingming lands fronting onto existing roads are CP lands. So a majority of road frontage parcels are CP lands, which means that it just becomes more, it requires like the building of new roads to access First Nation lands to accommodate sort of that growth or that development if NAWASH wants that. And of those CP lands, currently 70% are vacant. So there's about 380 CP lots right now that are vacant in the community. And so we'll come back to this point later, but sort of the point we want to make from the constraint perspective is just that existing CPs do limit in terms of where NAWASH can build new homes and businesses on First Nations lands. And then we've got the infrastructure, and really the purpose of including this is especially around the existing and planned water lines. So ideally, new development is located along the water line to take advantage of that service. So whether that's the existing water line or the water line, and of course, the project is ongoing right now about building the new water treatment plant just by north of, I guess it'd be north of the government docks there from where it normally currently is. And then finally, just want to provide just a little bit of information. I might skip to, oh yeah. So this is just a map around source water protection. And what source water protection is it looks at drinking water intake, so where you're getting your water from, and it looks at potential risks to it from a contamination standpoint traveling through the ground. And so there was a study that NAWASH has worked on with the UC of Guelph, where they have started to understand and map out areas that are more at risk to source water contamination versus others. And so this is another tool, another map that could be used in decision making, so that you're making sure that in areas where the vulnerability factor is higher, where there is more of a risk if there is a spill or a contaminant put in the ground, that you're taking more precautions to make sure that you're taking care of those and planning for them in a safe way. So all that being said, I want to make sure I'm getting through this in a decent amount of time. So with all that being said, what this map does here is it combines all the constraints we just talked about, plus it adds in all the places that you want to protect, including that information shared through other processes, which could include general hunting areas, swimming, areas of cultural importance, and others. So the light green really represents the areas where no known constraints have been identified at this point. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're free and clear of anything, but these would be at this point the ideal areas that you could start to look at and have more discussions internally about whether they are appropriate, and whether they are going to have any sort of impact on the places you do not want to develop. So what you'll notice on this map, though, is that there aren't many light green areas. And where they do exist, they aren't always in the most accessible locations. So that way up by the lighthouse, sort of along the bottoms of the points, Gravelly Bay area. And so that's sort of one of the themes or topics around sort of the next section, what we'll get into, is just around where to grow and how to grow. And similarly, this is a similar map, but just a little bit shown a little bit different, where it's sort of red green. It's almost binary, yes or no. And the green are the development potential areas, whereas the red are the places that have constraints identified on them. So again, green, there's not much land for NAWASH to grow into within the community. So that brings us to this topic around where to grow. And so the issue here, and like I just mentioned, First Nation land comprises of about 65% of Neshingaming, plus with the incorporation of just knowledge and other areas, additional development constraints that have been identified, like the alvars and the wetlands and the terrain that we just discussed. There are few parcels that can accommodate the expected land needs. So at the sort of moderate term, you're looking at 60 acres of need. At the higher end for the next 20 years, around 96 acres. So while still making the most, and all while still making the most efficient use of existing and planned infrastructure services. So why this matters and why we need to focus on this. This really helps direct new development and growth to areas that are appropriate for NAWASH, and that makes sense for NAWASH. So on this map, we've got some ideas down here, taking into account all the information that we have provided so far. And I know Rachel mentioned at the beginning around the community engagement narrative. One of the thoughts that people shared is that they really want to build in existing developed areas first. And so one of the thoughts we had was this idea around nodes, or more like concentrated sort of neighborhoods. And there is the thought around potentially creating 3 nodes, because they already sort of have been started to an extent, or some of them have an initial pillar in them. So the Medoki subdivision node, there's already a number of sort of offices and also homes in that area. And that is an area that could be expanded and grown into a bit of a larger neighborhood. There's the community center node, which has sort of established itself as the community center hub, where a lot of work happens, services, recreation. It's sort of like the natural center point of the community. And then there's also the new school area, which is sort of like a cornerstone area up there. And so with these three nodes, there's the idea that in these areas is where you could direct most or a lot of your residential and business type uses. In addition to that, we've also looked at the idea of infill lots. And so there's approximately 17 vacant infill lots on First Nation lands. And that was through looking at some work that Megan Burnside had done, as well as desktop exercise to look at what's changed since then. So there's about 17 vacant lots that you could use and place homes on now. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, there's about 380 CP lots that could have houses on them as well. And we don't expect all those lots to have houses on them. That is a lot, but we just want to acknowledge that there is that potential, that there are lots that are vacant, CP lots where houses could be as well. And the last type or area that development could be focused is around surveyed lots. And these are lots that have been surveyed or marked out, whether preliminary or whether final, but they're places that have been identified already. And there's sort of three areas that we've identified on this map, and you'll see them sort of outlined in light yellow there. There's the Dockside Road extensions, that's just north of the government docks. There's about 27 lots surveyed there. They are within sort of your water intake zone for your existing, but also your new water intake pipe. So there, you just want to be careful to make sure that you're planning in a proper way, so you're not impacting your water supply for the entire community by building on those lots. But though that is one possibility. There's also up by Lighthouse Road about 89 surveyed lots. They might be enlarged, so you might not be able to get 89 lots up there, just because you might have to enlarge them to make sure it's big enough to accommodate a septic system. But the other downfall of those lots as well is that they are far from the water line and would be challenging to service. And then finally, there's Hope Bay, which has about 132 lots. Again, these are a significant distance from the water line and would be a more challenging to service with water. And we also recognize too that the community has begun a number of years ago a process to figure out what the community wants to do with the Hope Bay lots. We have heard through this project a number of ideas as well, and housing has been one of them, but hasn't been the only one. So maybe what we could do is what we're trying to understand mainly from this slide, and we'll do it sort of one question at a time. So maybe we can bring up the first question. So question 4. And so want to focus more on those nodes to begin with. So the Madoki node, the community center node, and the new school node. So in what areas should Nawash focus new home businesses? And you can select all that apply. So do you agree that new businesses should be in the new school node, or new businesses and homes should be in the new school node, the community center node, the Madoki subdivision node, none? Or again, if you need more time and information to decide. So I'll leave that open for about 30 or 45 seconds, maybe 30 seconds to get your input. All right, we can end that poll. So it looks like 82% said the new school node, 64 said the community center node, 64 said the Medoki subdivision node, and then there was no votes for none or I need more information to decide. So thank you for that one. And maybe we'll move on to the next question. So the next one I think is for the infill lots. So that should pop up on people's screens now. So we're curious, so should WASH focus its effort on building homes on vacant lots within existing neighborhoods, often called infill lots? So for this one, if you want to answer yes, no, or again, I need more information or time to decide. So I'll give another 30 seconds for that one. All right, and I think we can wrap that one up. So the results said 64% yes, 18% no, and 18% I need more time to decide. So thank you for that. I'd love for any of those answers too, if you want to post in the chat a little more around your reasoning or thoughts behind that, would be great for the team to see and hear those opinions. And then maybe we'll jump to the last question on this one around the surveyed lots. And so this will be one where you can select multiple options as well. So in what existing surveyed areas should NAWASH focus new housing? So do you agree that there should be new housing at the Lighthouse Road area shown on the map, at the Dockside Road extension area, at Hope Bay, none of the above, or again, you need more time or information to decide? And so I'll restart that 30-second clock. All right, I think we can stop that one as well. So it looks like 33% said Lighthouse Road, 50% said Dockside Road extension, 42% said Hope Bay, and 33 said none. So looks like a distribution between all of them. So again, we'd love to hear your thoughts around each of those, and particularly if you don't want any of those developed, which ones are sort of reasons why for any of those options, I think would be great in the chat. So I think just in terms of time and what we committed to getting you out of here by as well. So it's 8 o'clock. That sort of wraps up my portion of it, and I'm going to pass it over to Matt with the capital infrastructure plan. And then, or actually maybe quickly, I'm just going to run through next steps. See if I can skip through to it. Ooh. So in terms of next steps, what we're going to do is take some of the direction of this community forum. And we've also met earlier with the Land Use Plan and Capital Plan Committee. We're going to have another meeting with them to go through the rest and also discuss some more engagement opportunities, possibly with the community as well. And we'll be using all that information to help draft the land use plan. And then any carryover relevant information from that and from these meetings will also help influence the capital infrastructure plan that Negan Burnside will be working on in the coming months. So on the capital infrastructure plan side, I'll pass it over to Matt just to discuss what's going on with that project.
All right, thank you, Mitchell, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening and hanging in here to the end. So, as you may know from the last community session that we had, the land use plan and capital infrastructure plan is one project that we're working on together. And as the land use plan is starting to get a lot of the findings and finish up, we're going to utilize a lot of the information that was gathered from the community and from a lot of the research that was done to develop a capital infrastructure plan. And in it, you'll see the proposed locations of residential lots and how they will be laid out, and the location of future non-residential buildings that the community would like to see. That'll be unique to your community. The 20-year infrastructure plan will also show and present a plan on how to provide services to meet the residential, non-residential developments. So basically, tried to figure out how are we going to provide water, wastewater, solid waste, roads, drainage, electrification, telecommunications, etc. Basically, the services that are needed to support the community as it grows. Our plan is going to look at the condition and age of all the existing infrastructure and trying to determine which infrastructure needs upgrades or the timing of when that infrastructure will need to be upgraded over the 20-year period. It'll look at existing and future community needs. It'll follow engineering guidelines and best practices. It'll also look at the level of service standards that the federal government has to ensure that we qualify for funding for any of those parts that can, but it won't be the determining factor. And anything else that you, as a community, think is important. And that's why it's important for us to get your feedback to help us develop this plan. So on the next slide here, you'll see that we're currently collecting information on the existing community infrastructure. So we have a couple trips planned for some of our engineering team to go up. And myself and some of my colleagues already have been to the community and know what your infrastructure looks like and what condition a lot of it is in. And we're going to continue doing that to assess what your future community needs through input from community members, from some of the committee meetings that we're having, and of course, from any feedback that you would like to provide. So how can you help us? It's really easy. All you got to do is go to your community website, www.nawash.ca, and please fill in a community survey on your infrastructure. And we'll be giving away $10, $25 gift cards for people once we complete that. So please go to the website, fill in a survey, and let your family members, friends, any of the community members know. So that way, the more information we get, the better it is to help us out. You'll be hearing more from us as we develop this infrastructure plan, and we'll hopefully have some additional meetings, hopefully in person once we get through this pandemic, and if not, virtually such as this. And that's the quick update we have on that. And we're going to be moving now, I believe, to questions.
That's right. Thank you, Matt, for that update. Okay, so there have been several questions in the chat that some of them have been answered, but I think first off, we can ask the panelists a little bit more about the project timeline. So where are we at in the process of creating the land use plan, and will there be an opportunity for the public to provide feedback on the final land use plan?
Yeah, I can take that on. Yeah, great question. So I think where we're at in the process right now is the issues and options report and the feedback that we're getting tonight and through the committee. That really helps provide a lot of the direction, and it sort of it helps solidify and provide which direction NAWASH wants to move in. So once we get that feedback, and we're having another meeting with the committee in a couple of weeks, where we'll get be able to go through some more chapters or more sections in the plan. We'll be able to actually start drafting the land use plan. So we're about, I would say during the summer, in the next few months, there'll be a draft land use plan. And then at that point, there will be an opportunity for another key meeting. I often say, I might have said this at the first meeting, once you actually have a draft plan in front of you, where you're actually able to look at the maps and hold it and look at it more closely and in more detail, and see what's included in it, oftentimes that's when we get a lot more and better discussion. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that maybe some restrictions might be lifted. And maybe if it's in the summertime, we might be able to do it outdoors, maybe in person in a safe way. But fingers crossed, and we'll see how things go. But yes, there will be more opportunities in the future before it gets finalized.
Great, thank you, Mitch. Okay, so the next question I have was the piece of land within Owen Sound city limits on the bottom of 5th Street where the baseball park is included in the 20-year plan?
Yeah, so all the, so we haven't finished the whole plan yet. So that'll be sort of part of the next phase. But yes, all the lands, NAWASH provided a whole list of lands that it owns outside of the reserve as well, including like the hunting ground, the fishing islands, and many others. And so part of the discussion that we need to have with the committee as well is around what's going to be useful for the community in terms of planning for those lands, and what will be useful to put and include this plan to help you and provide the most benefit for you. So yes, those lands will be part of the plan.
Awesome, thank you. I wonder if maybe you could speak a little bit to how prescriptive the land use plan might be. And for instance, maybe speak a little bit about how it would directly affect members.
Yeah, that's a great, hard-hitting question. I think this is really one of the, in essence, one of the main parts of the land use plan. It's really meant to be a visionary document. It's meant to show where the community wants to grow, put in ideas around either the types of housing or where you want housing to be located, or the types of businesses, or how buildings could be reused or redesignated for something else in the community, like existing buildings, for some of those things that Rachel had mentioned earlier, some of those ideas. I think that there's, in terms of the prescriptive nature, I don't see this land use plan as being a very prescriptive tool, as being like a thou shalt, or you have to do this, you can't do that. I see it as more a guiding document for NAWASH to use in its decision making, so that people can know what the community wants to build and where, but also what it wants to protect and why, and where that's located. So it's kind of a balance, but I see it being more of an aspirational document that'll help guide decision making for the community.
Awesome, thank you, Mitch. And Corey, I wonder if you wanted to jump in as well.
No, I didn't have anything on that one to say.
I just saw you weren't muted, so.
No, sorry, I unmuted myself when the question started, just in case I had to get on quick. So no.
Got it.
That.
Great.
You holding the space? You holding the space bar, Corey?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so those are all the questions that I have today. Many of the questions that were answered by people who are participating were answered in the chat. So there are 2 places where people can go to get answers, see the chat and see what questions were asked and the answers there. So if there are, I'm just going to check one more time. Okay, so there is one more question that just came in regarding whether or not CEP lands would be available for sale to members.
Maybe look at Larissa for that one, just in terms of
I'm thinking
selling of CPs.
that's more that's more of a governance type of question, but I'll try. I think after this land use plan is done, we will have enough information to be able to present to the council table, so that they can make those kinds of decisions as to whether, as to how they're going to allot lands to members, and when. So I think, yeah, I think the chief of council would ultimately make that type of decision.
Larissa. And just seeing no more questions here in the chat here, maybe I'll pass it over to you for some closing remarks.
Oh, sorry, Rachel, I did see one other question there, and I don't know if it got missed. And
Fire away.
Julie, you might have to answer this one, but there was a question asked, and it relates, I think, more to the shoreline flooding. If we've had any sort of review or consideration for climate change raising water levels in Georgian Bay.
Yeah, I think that question was actually answered in the chat by Jeremy.
Oh,
I can read it. It says, yes, climate change and rising water levels have been considered in constraints to building along the shoreline.
Okay, I missed that in the chat. Sorry. I just saw it a couple of times come up from Jessica, so just wanted to make sure it was answered.
Not a problem.
Yeah, that's a great question too. And just to add on to that, like I think climate change will be a major theme throughout the land use plan, and with the idea that sort of any future work that NAWASH does, whether it's from even like an engineering standpoint or any other projects it works on, just the recommendation probably that climate change be incorporated in all those for those different changes, but also like how to mitigate against it as well. So I think that's a great point that Jessica brought up.
Okay, and I think that's the end of our question and answer session. So over to you, Larissa.
I just want to thank everybody for coming and joining us and assisting with your land use plan, our land use plan. I just ask that you please keep checking the nawash.ca site for any updates, as well as the Facebook hub of NAWASH. Other than that, Chimigwech. And Chimigwech to all the team who put this presentation together, and all of the reports and all their hard work, and all of the community that's involved with assisting with this. Thank you.